Welcome the Lord's chosen. History never shifts when people stay quiet. It bends the moment someone dares to open their mouth. Think about it. Entire empires have crumbled, revolutions have ignited, and cultures have been rewritten, not by armies, not by wealth, but by one voice refusing to stay buried. The power of speech is so unnerving that the world's most oppressive regimes have always feared poets, prophets, and truth-tellers more than generals. In fact, studies of social movements reveal that a single spoken truth, amplified at the right moment, spreads faster than propaganda ever could. And here's the wild irony. They didn't fear your silence. They were counting on it. But then you opened your mouth. And that's when the game ended. It wasn't the trembling confession they expected. It wasn't the weak plea they rehearsed in their heads. It was a shot across the room that cut cleaner than a blade, landing with precision that made their smirks evaporate. And if we're being honest, it was almost comical, watching the very people who used to roll their eyes at you suddenly shift in their seats like school kids caught cheating on an exam. See, the moment you spoke, the air thickened. The unspoken hierarchy cracked. Every carefully polished mask slipped. And for once, they had to sit in silence, because your voice had become the one thing they couldn't control, couldn't edit, and couldn't laugh off. This isn't about being loud. This isn't about shouting into the void. This is about being chosen. Chosen not by applause or approval, but by fire. And when you finally spoke, you didn't just change the conversation, you changed the entire equation. Number one, your words became proof they couldn't silence the evidence. That's the truth of it. The moment you spoke, the air shifted, because what was once hidden had now been made undeniable. Lies can only thrive in shadows, in the places where nobody dares to challenge them. But when you opened your mouth, you dragged everything into the light. And suddenly, there was no going back. They had relied on your silence like it was a safety net. They counted on you keeping quiet, so they could keep pretending, keep manipulating, keep rewriting the script in their favor. But the second you spoke, you made their version of events collapse like a house of cards standing in a storm. It wasn't about how loud you were. It wasn't even about emotion. It was the fact that what you said couldn't be denied. It didn't need theatrics. It didn't need exaggeration. It was raw, solid, and immovable. And once those words entered the space, they became living proof. Something that even the boldest liar couldn't erase. They could roll their eyes, they could smirk, they could throw accusations, but none of it could compete with the undeniable reality of what you released. Evidence doesn't argue, evidence doesn't beg to be believed, it just stands. And your words carried that weight. The most unsettling part for them was realizing that your voice didn't just challenge their lies, it confirmed what they had always feared, that the truth was never theirs to control. All along, it had been sitting inside you, waiting for the moment to surface, and when it did, it landed with the kind of finality that even silence could never undo. That's why they scrambled. That's why they tried to twist, deny, or drown it out. Because in that moment, your words became more than words. They became the receipt, the record, the irreversible evidence that shattered their illusions and left them standing exposed. When you spoke, you didn't just tell a story. You sealed it. And nothing, no excuse, no distraction, no performance, could erase what had just been cemented in place. Number two, speaking wasn't courage, it was survival. People often mistake the act of opening your mouth as some grand, fearless gesture, but that's not the truth. For you, staying quiet wasn't strength, it was slow suffocation. Holding back the truth was like carrying a weight that grew heavier every day, pressing down until there was almost no room to breathe. Speaking wasn't about impressing anyone or proving that you were bold. It was about refusing to die a silent death under the pressure of what needed to be said. When you finally let the words out, it wasn't some polished performance or heroic speech. It was the release of something that had been clawing at your insides for too long. And once it came out, it was clear. You hadn't spoken because you wanted to be seen as strong. You had spoken because silence was no longer an option. Silence was killing you faster than the backlash of the truth ever could. That's what they never understood. They thought you kept quiet because you were afraid. What they didn't realize was that fear had already turned into something else. Necessity. The difference matters. Courage is about choosing to do something even though you're scared. Survival is about not having a choice at all. You spoke because if you didn't, you would have been erased by the weight of what they wanted you to carry. Your words were oxygen and silence was poison. That's what shifted everything. Once the truth was spoken, it was as if your lungs finally expanded again. It wasn't about applause, it wasn't about recognition. It was about staying alive fully without being crushed by the unspoken. And that's why it shook them. They couldn't label it bravery because bravery they could dismiss as dramatics. They couldn't call it weakness because weakness doesn't explode with that kind of clarity. They realized your voice came from a place deeper than courage. It came from raw survival. And survival always wins because it doesn't care about appearances. It only cares about breaking through no matter the cost. Number 3, you didn't just speak, you shifted the power dynamic. That's the part they never saw coming. For so long they believed they were the ones holding the authority, controlling the story, setting the tone of every room. They thought your silence was submission, proof that they had the upper hand, but the moment you spoke, that illusion shattered. Suddenly the room no longer revolved around them, it revolved around the truth you dropped, and everyone present felt the shift. Power isn't about titles or positions, it's about control of the narrative. As long as you were quiet, they dictated what was remembered, what was believed, and what was ignored. But your words flipped the script. You took what they thought they owned, control over perception, and ripped it out of their grasp. They weren't the authority anymore. You were, because truth carries more weight than performance, and in that moment you held it. The shift was undeniable. Their confidence cracked, their certainty wavered, and the control they had flaunted began slipping through their hands. Even those watching from the sidelines felt the change. People who once leaned toward them now lean toward you because power always gravitates to the one who dares to speak what others only whisper, and that's what you did. You turned whispers into declarations, and by doing so, you forced a realignment. It wasn't just about exposing lies, it was about showing everyone that silence had never been agreement and quiet had never been weakness. By opening your mouth, you pulled yourself out from under their authority and put them under the weight of yours. That's why it stung so deeply. They had mistaken control for dominance, forgetting that dominance only lasts until someone calls it out. And you did. From that moment on, the balance was different. They were no longer untouchable. You had reminded them and everyone else that authority doesn't belong to those who silence others. It belongs to the one who dares to speak when silence is demanded. Number 4, your voice didn't echo. It shattered glass. That break is not decorative, it's forensic. An echo can be ignored or tuned out because it leaves the room as quickly as it arrived. A shatter throws fragments everywhere, and every fragment reflects a truth that can't be smoothed over. When you spoke, you didn't create a reverberation that fades with time. You created a break that everyone had to look at. The people who relied on facades suddenly had to move around the damage instead of pretending nothing had happened. Breaking something changes how you touch it afterward. Conversations that used to be easy now have edges. Alliances that felt permanent now carry the faintest risk of collapse because the evidence of what was broken sits between people like a table no one can flip back over. Those who built their comfort on polished surfaces find those surfaces irreparably marred. That's the sting. You didn't merely reveal a problem. You altered the terrain of interaction so that avoidance became a conscious choice rather than an instinct. A shattered thing forces decisions. It makes excuses harder to sell because the visual truth contradicts the narrative they worked so hard to craft. Apologies, rationalizations, and staged apologies all become guesswork next to the simple fact that the glass is cracked. People cannot pretend the unbroken past is still available. The present now contains evidence that changes what will be accepted, what will be challenged, and what will be remembered. There's a cleansing in that honesty, brutal as it is. The moment refuses comfortable restoration and pushes everyone to account for where they stood when the break happened. For you, the result is permanence. Your words create a reference point that lasts longer than any spin or wishful forgetting. The damage marks the moment of truth and marks you as the one who forced it into the open. That rupture is your legacy, plain and undeniable. Number 5, they feared not the volume of your words, but the weight of them. Sound can be shrugged off, meaning cannot. When you spoke, it wasn't a flood of noise to be drowned out or mocked. It was a precise, heavy fact that resisted every attempt to be moved or dismissed. The difference is simple. Loudness demands attention for a moment, but gravity changes how things settle. Your truth forced the room to rebalance itself around a new center of seriousness. Their instinct was to treat what you said as performance because performances are negotiable. A show can be laughed at, replayed, or ignored tomorrow. Your words were not a show. They carried specific details, steady logic, and consequences that landed like lead. People felt the pull. Conversations that used to orbit around comfortable lies were suddenly dragged toward accountability. That kind of pull doesn't fit into their scripts. It rearranged motives, loyalties, and the assumptions they built their safety on. Worse for them, weight reveals who will hold up under it and who will crumble. It exposed the difference between those who speak to get applause and those who speak to stop harm. The applause seekers could keep yelling until their throats were raw, but their noise couldn't compete with the single sentence that carried proof. The moment your statement hung in the air, it created a silent test. Either people acknowledged the truth and adjusted, or they showed themselves by denying it and looking small in the attempt. They tried the usual tactics: diversion, humor, outrage, because those are cheap tools designed for spectacle, not substance. None of those tools reduced the mass of what you had put forward. Instead, they made their reactions more obvious. The heavier the truth, the uglier the spin looked. The weight didn't bully anyone into agreement. It only made pretense impossible to sustain without looking plainly dishonest. In the end, what crushed them wasn't clamoring or theatrics. It was the unmistakable, unavoidable pull of something that mattered more than their image. Your words shifted the axis of the room and refused to be shrugged off. That is why they feared you. Not because you were loud, but because you made the world tilt toward an honest tilt they could not stop. Number 6. When you spoke, masks fell faster than defenses. The people who'd spent years rehearsing a face for every room suddenly found there was no script that fit the truth you released. What they had built, polished smiles, practiced outrage, sympathetic nods, was all surface-level theater meant to distract from what actually happened. Your words didn't just contradict their performance, they exposed the seams. That exposure forced immediate reactions. Some tried to cling to their roles with louder lines, others froze because the part they'd been playing required a reality that no longer existed. Those masks had been convenient tools. They allowed people to avoid responsibility, to trade empathy for optics, to walk away from consequences while keeping their reputation intact. The moment you pulled the thread, every carefully managed expression started to peel away. People who'd been generous in public revealed the calculation underneath. Those who wore concern like a badge showed that concern was a costume, not a commitment. The speed of the fall was painful to watch because it stripped away the comfortable ambiguity they relied on. Suddenly, their choices were visible in plain sight. This collapse didn't happen because you wanted to humiliate anyone. It happened because truth creates an urgency that performance can't match. Masks survive in a world where appearances are the currency. When someone introduces an unvarnished fact that conflicts with those appearances, masks either adapt by becoming honest, or they slide off, revealing the person beneath. Watching a mask drop is a test. Will this person stand accountable, or will they reconstruct a new, subtler disguise? The difference tells you everything you need to know about them. When defenses fall after masks, the aftermath is revealing and permanent. Relationships that were based on image findered. Alliances rooted in convenience dissolved. And for you, the result was clarity. The room around you finally aligned with reality instead of illusion. People who mattered showed themselves, those who didn't drifted away. Your words didn't just break facades. They cleared the air so everyone could see who had been acting and who had been real. Number 7, your words made silence complicit. The second you spoke, neutrality disappeared. Before that moment, people could hide behind quiet, pretending that not choosing a side was the same as being fair or wise. But your voice stripped that cover away. It forced everyone in the room to confront what silence really meant: agreement with the lie, protection of the guilty, or fear of losing comfort. Silence was no longer harmless background noise. It became a declaration. That's the power of truth when spoken. It doesn't only expose the liar, it exposes the bystanders. Suddenly, the people who once blended into the wallpaper were seen for what they really were, either too invested in preserving peace at your expense or too afraid to admit what they already knew. In that instant, silence itself became evidence. Every word you released made the unspoken stand out louder because the contrast between action and avoidance was undeniable. What unsettled them most was that you didn't just call out wrong behavior. You made everyone else take a position. Comfort was no longer available as a shield. People who thought they could keep both sides happy found themselves cornered, forced to reveal their loyalties not by what they said, but by what they refused to say. Some tried to hide behind half statements or vague gestures, but the truth has a way of making vagueness look cowardly. The more they avoided speaking, the clearer their position became. And that's why your words had such weight. They not only tore down the lie, but also demanded that everyone watching show their true colors. Some chose courage and stood with you, others shrank into silence, and a few exposed themselves outright as protectors of deceit. Whatever their response, none of them left untouched. Your voice had turned silence into a mirror, and once that mirror was held up, nobody could escape their own reflection. That is how speaking changes not just narratives, but people themselves. Number 8. You didn't spark conflict, you exposed it already burning. The tension had always been there, hiding under polite words, fake smiles, and carefully arranged silences. What you did was pull back the curtain. The fire wasn't yours to start, it was theirs to hide. They had built a false peace on denial, covering cracks with charm and patching wounds with distractions. But peace built on pretense isn't peace at all. It's a performance waiting for someone brave enough to call it out. Your voice did exactly that. When you spoke, you didn't create division, you revealed it. People who had been pretending to get along were already at odds, simmering with resentment, envy, or guilt. Their calm wasn't genuine, and it was a fragile surface held together by silence. By telling the truth, you didn't pour gasoline on the fire. You removed the lid they had been holding down with both hands, and suddenly what they thought they could keep contained came rushing into the open. This is why they reacted so violently. It wasn't your words they hated most. It was what your words forced them to see. They could no longer deny the fractures in their relationships, the lies in their stories, the rot beneath the surface. You didn't invent their hostility toward you or toward each other. You revealed it was already there, baked into the foundation they were standing on. And once revealed, it was impossible to pretend otherwise. That's the uncomfortable truth. Real peace doesn't collapse when someone speaks. If harmony exists, honesty strengthens it. But if honesty destroys it, then what existed wasn't harmony at all. Your words made that fact unavoidable. You tore away the illusion of order and forced everyone to admit the chaos had been smoldering underfoot the entire time. The fire belonged to them, not you. All you did was show the room what it had been breathing in all along. Number 9, you weren't loud, you were precise. That's what cut deeper than anything else. Loudness can be ignored, brushed off as emotion, labeled dramatic or excessive. People are used to noise, they train themselves to tune it out. But precision is different. Precision leaves no room to escape because it doesn't come with wasted words or scattered shots. It lands exactly where it should, with no excess to dilute its impact. When you spoke, every word carried intention, and that intention dismantled their comfort with surgical clarity. Noise tries to overwhelm, precision disarms. You didn't need to raise your voice or flood the air with arguments. You chose the scalpel over the hammer, and that choice made your words unshakable. A hammer can break things wide open, but it also risks missing its mark. A scalpel, though, leaves no doubt. It separates truth from lies with clean edges, cutting away excuses until only the core remains. That's what unsettled them most, the fact that your words left no wiggle room. There was nothing for them to twist. No exaggeration they could mock. No loophole they could crawl through. Your precision revealed the difference between speaking to be heard and speaking to be understood. Most people throw words around like confetti, hoping that at least one lands. You didn't. You delivered truth so sharp it couldn't be softened or misinterpreted. That's why they stumbled afterward. They weren't fighting volume, they were fighting accuracy. And accuracy is undefeatable because it speaks for itself. Their defenses relied on distraction, on creating noise to drown out anything that threatened them. But when you cut directly through the middle of that noise, their tactics collapsed. No amount of shouting or spinning could erase the fact that your words had already carved through the nonsense. You weren't loud. You didn't need to be. Precision carried more force than volume ever could. And that's why your voice didn't just land. It lingered, impossible to dislodge, undeniable in its exactness. Number 10. Speaking changed you before it changed them. That's the part no one talks about. The internal shift that happens the moment your truth leaves your mouth. Before you spoke, there was always that weight pressing down on you. That constant negotiation in your head about when, how, or if you should say anything at all. You measured the cost, worried about the fallout, and almost convinced yourself that silence was safer. But when the words finally came out, something inside you clicked, and you realized that the act itself had already transformed you. You weren't just defending yourself anymore. You crossed a line you could never step back from. You became someone who would never again apologize for existing, someone who had tasted the freedom of honesty and found it more powerful than fear. That shift wasn't about how they reacted. It was about how you felt in your own skin for the first time. Speaking stripped away the hesitation that had kept you smaller than you were meant to be. You understood in that exact moment that you didn't need permission to take up space, to assert truth, to live unshrinkable. Their response almost didn't matter because the most important change had already happened inside you. Whether they resisted, denied, or lashed out, it couldn't undo the fact that you had stepped into a different version of yourself. A version that didn't beg for validation, a version that no longer asked if the truth was too heavy for others to carry. You learned that your existence isn't negotiable, and neither is your voice. And that's why, even before your words shook them, they had already freed you. You realized that silence had been the cage, and speaking was the key. You didn't just challenge lies in that moment, you claimed yourself. And once you claim yourself, no one can put you back into the box they built for you. Number 11. They thought you'd beg for forgiveness, not deliver a verdict. Their whole expectation was built on a script where you would shrink, apologize, promise to do better, and then quietly accept the terms they set. They banked on your humility being a currency they could spend forever. Instead, your voice carried something colder and clearer than apology, a verdict. It wasn't rancor for the sake of spite or a dramatic flourish. It was an unvarnished assessment based on facts, memory, and the consequences their actions demanded. Where they expected remorse, they found accountability, and accountability doesn't beg. It names what happened and assigns responsibility. That stunned them because it flipped the roles they'd rehearsed. They had practiced how to take blame, how to shape an apology into something that returned the room to normal. What they didn't prepare for was someone who wouldn't accept a performance in place of justice. Your words didn't plead for sympathy, they stated outcomes. They listed what was true, what was owed, and what could no longer be tolerated. In that instant, your voice read them like a judge reading a verdict, clear, final, and lacking any plea for mercy. The shock wasn't just in being confronted, it was in being measured and found wanting without the distraction of theatrics, because a verdict carries heft. It doesn't invite negotiation the way an apology can. It sets terms and creates expectations for how history will be recorded. People who live by impression management panic at that kind of finality because they can't smooth it over with charm. Their instinctive retort, outrage, minimization, or performative humility falls flat when faced with something that doesn't request forgiveness but instead demands consequence. They scramble not because they are guilty in public, but because the private ledger they kept in silence has just been totaled and published. Your voice didn't sound like desperation, it sounded like judgment because it came from a place of clarity and endurance, not need. That removed their leverage. The moment you stopped asking for validation and started insisting on reckoning, you changed the terms of engagement forever. They mistook your earlier restraint for weakness, and in misreading you, they revealed how badly they'd miscalculated the cost of truth. Number 12, your words turned their secrets into public land. What they had guarded so fiercely, what they had hoarded in the dark like private treasure, became common knowledge the second you spoke. Secrets only hold power when they're kept hidden, when they can be leveraged, traded, or used as weapons. Once exposed, they lose their sharpness. They can no longer be controlled, and the people who once clung to them like shields suddenly find themselves standing defenseless in the open. That's what your words did. You stripped the exclusivity away and spread the truth out where everyone could see it. The unraveling was immediate. They had built their influence on selective disclosure, on deciding who deserved to know and who should be kept in the dark. But when you dismantled that system with a single statement, you robbed them of their ability to dictate perception. Their secrets stopped being a currency. They became public property, available to anyone willing to look. In that shift, the entire balance of power tilted. No longer could they hide behind the excuse of privacy or the mystique of what others didn't understand. The truth was out, and it no longer belonged to them. That's what scared them most. It wasn't just that you spoke, it was that you democratized their control. Suddenly, they weren't the sole keepers of the narrative. Everyone could measure, compare, and judge for themselves. And once truth is shared, it cannot be returned to the shadows. You can't unknow what's been revealed. They could deny it, attempt to downplay it, or spin it with new lies, but the damage was done. Exposure had erased exclusivity, and that's the beauty and the brutality of it. Secrets lose their poison once scattered. They don't vanish, but they no longer pierce in the same way. Your words broke the lock they had placed on reality, and in doing so you made it belong to everyone. What was once their weapon became nothing more than history, shared, examined, and stripped of the fear it once carried. Number 13, you didn't just speak, you created irreversibility. Saying the truth aloud changes the timeline. Before your words, stories floated in limbo, negotiable and soft. After your statement, history gained a permanent stamp. That moment can't be refiled, edited, or rewound. Denials can roar, spin doctors can stage theatrics, and defenders can rewrite headlines until they're hoarse, but none of it erases the fact that the truth was once spoken and heard. That permanence is what terrifies them most. Irreversibility shows up in ordinary ways. Someone remembers differently, someone else repeats what you said, and slowly a public record forms from private courage. Your voice becomes a reference point everyone must reckon with. Laws of optics and memory shift. What was once optional becomes unavoidable. The people who depended on confusion and plausible deniability suddenly find their room for maneuver shrinking. Their strategies work only when doubt remains. Your spoken truth removes doubt and leaves them exposed to consequence. This kind of finality also forces choices. Institutions, friendships, and reputations must now be rebuilt around a fact that cannot be denied, not simply adjusted by a handy apology. People who counted on time to smooth things over discover that time now works against them, because the spoken truth is archival. It's cited in conversations, remembered in meetings, and invoked when accountability is required. The longer it exists, the more solid it becomes. Irreversibility isn't about dramatic vindication, it's practical. It changes how decisions are made going forward. It shifts who gets trusted, who gets promoted, who gets listened to. It becomes evidence in the plainest sense, something that anchors arguments and shapes outcomes. That anchor is permanent in effect, even if not in headline. They can rage, they can gaslight, and they can try to reframe the narrative, but all of those moves are attempts to patch a timeline that has already been altered. The truth you spoke travels forward in every interaction that follows, quietly shaping what's possible and what isn't. That's why your voice didn't merely land. It rewired the future people would have to live with. Number 14, you proved that the chosen don't wait for permission to be heard. That isn't a slogan. It's a shift in how power shows up. People who wait for invitations or polite openings are practicing a kind of permission-seeking that keeps them small. Being chosen isn't about someone else handing you a spotlight. It's about deciding in the middle of a room that would rather you stayed quiet that your truth matters enough to stake a claim. When you spoke, that claim was the act that named you. It didn't need a certificate or applause, it needed conviction. And that was enough to change how people had to treat you. What made it undeniable was the posture behind your words. You didn't couch your truth in apologetic tone or hedged disclaimers. You didn't ask for a hall pass. You stood in the clear, said what had been collecting inside you, and by doing so you redefined your role from passive to active. People notice that shift even if they can't name it. They respond not because you demanded it, but because the world responds to presence that won't be negotiated away. presence backed by truth rewrites expectations. It forces others to stop depending on your silence as a default. That audacity isn't loud for its own sake. It's precise, steady, and unbothered by whether it's popular. That calm insistence is what makes Chosen feel like more than luck. It becomes a function of integrity. You stand where you're supposed to, even when no one handed you permission. The result is practical and immediate. Doors that were previously closed begin to open because people stop treating you like someone who can be ignored. Allies who were waiting for a sign now see the sign and act. Accountability becomes possible because someone has already named the problem out loud. In short, speaking without permission shifts burdens and responsibilities. It moves the room to account for you rather than letting you account for it. That movement doesn't need validation to be real. The act was the confirmation. Chosen isn't a title given, it's a stance taken, and you took it. Everything we've explored comes down to one undeniable truth. Speaking up changes the world, starting with you. Every word you released carried weight, shattered illusions, and exposed what was hidden, leaving a permanent mark that silence could never achieve. You didn't merely respond, you shifted the balance, revealed hidden fires, and forced everyone around you to confront reality. The Chosen aren't defined by recognition or applause. They are defined by audacity, by the refusal to let lies, fear, or convenience dictate what can and cannot be said. Your voice became proof that truth cannot be contained, that masks crumble under clarity, and that secrets lose their power once exposed. It turned neutrality into complicity, removed the illusion of peace, and created irreversibility. And most importantly, it changed you before it changed anyone else. You emerged unshakable, unwilling to apologize for existing, equipped with the knowledge that your presence, your voice, and your choices are enough to redefine every narrative they thought they controlled. This isn't about confrontation for the sake of drama. It's about realizing that when someone refuses to stay silent, they become a force that reshapes perception, authority, and reality itself. The room, the people, and even time bend around someone who speaks with precision, conviction, and clarity. The Chosen aren't loud, they're exacting. They don't wait for permission, they claim it. And once they do, nothing can return the world to its previous state. So let this be your takeaway. Every word you dare to speak is a seed of transformation. It cannot be ignored, erased, or diminished. It exposes, it liberates, and it shifts the axis of everything around it. You are not here to whisper into the void. You are here to declare, to dismantle, and to create truths that endure. Your voice matters, it always has. And now, after speaking, it changes everything, forever. If this hit you with the clarity and power it was meant to, don't let it stop here. Subscribe to the channel and become part of a space where voices aren't silenced and truths aren't watered down. Like this video to show that you're ready to stand unshakable, comment to declare your own experiences, and share it to spread the kind of impact that refuses to stay hidden. Every click, every comment, every share is more than engagement. It's a choice to join the movement of people who refuse to stay quiet, who refuse to settle for illusions, and who are ready to change everything, be seen, be heard, be unstoppable. Stay blessed always.